Before you immerse yourself in tonight's terror, hit that subscribe button if you think you can handle even darker stories lurking in the shadows. You ever take a job thinking it's going to be one thing and it turns out to be something completely different? That's how I ended up working nights at a mortuary in New Orleans. At first, it seemed perfect. Quiet hours, creepy vibes, and the kind of place that practically begged for a supernatural investigation. I thought I'd turn my shifts into content gold, hidden cameras, eerie footage, and maybe even a viral ghost video or two. Yeah, I know. Dumb idea in hindsight. I had heard the rumors about the place. Everyone in town had. Supposedly, it was haunted, cursed, or both. But I didn't buy into that stuff. Not really. People love a good ghost story, especially here in New Orleans. Still, I'd be lying if I said the thought of documenting something real didn't excite me. My channel was struggling, and this seemed like the perfect way to stand out. The job itself was simple enough. Prepare the facilities for the next day, make sure everything stayed clean, and keep an eye on the security monitors. Nothing too crazy. But a few days before my first shift, I got an email that changed everything. It came from someone calling themselves a friend. No address, no phone number, just a name at the bottom, Joseph Bell. The subject line read, "Your first night." At first, I thought it was a prank. The mortuary barely had a website. There was no way they were tech-savvy enough to send onboarding emails. But curiosity got the better of me, so I opened it. The message was short and to the point. If you value your life, follow these rules. If you ignore this, it's not just your life at risk, it's your soul. I stared at the screen for a long minute, trying to decide whether I should laugh or delete it. It had to be a joke, right? Some local messing with the new guy. But something about the tone bothered me. It wasn't trying to scare me, it felt more like a warning. And that last line, it sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't explain why, but I didn't delete the email. Instead, I printed it out and shoved it in my bag. I told myself it was just to amuse myself later, but deep down I already knew I'd be taking it seriously. Something about the name, Joseph Bell, stuck in my head. It felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. The mortuary was quiet when I arrived, just as I expected. The night shift supervisor gave me a quick tour, showing me the basics, where to find the cleaning supplies, how to monitor the cameras, and the location of the embalming room. "You'll be fine," he said, brushing off my questions about the rumors. "This place is old, sure, but don't let your imagination get the better of you." He left before I could ask anything else. The first few hours were uneventful. I cleaned the floors, checked the inventory, and even set up a couple of my hidden cameras. I figured if anything weird happened, I'd catch it on tape. Then around 11 p.m., I remembered the email. I pulled out the printout and scanned the rules again, feeling a mix of skepticism and unease. Rule 1. If you hear a baby crying, check all drawers. One will be partially open. Close it immediately. I glanced at the rows of metal drawers lining the walls. They looked harmless enough, but the thought of opening one sent a shiver down my spine. Rule 2. Always lock the embalming room by 11:30 p.m. If the door unlocks, pray. The embalming room was just down the hall. I made a mental note to double-check the lock before the deadline. Rule 3. If the power flickers, light a white candle and place it by the nearest body. I had packed a couple of candles in my bag just in case. Rule 4. Don't touch any body tagged with a red toe tag. They're not truly dead. Noted. Rule 5. At midnight, place a coin under the tongue of the oldest body. Do not skip this step. I didn't even want to think about that one yet. Rule 6. If you hear a song playing faintly, cover your ears and hum until it stops. This one seemed the most absurd, but it also made me the most nervous. By the time the clock hit 11:30 p.m., I had locked the embalming room and triple-checked the door. I told myself I was just being thorough, but my hands were shaking the whole time. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of a baby crying. It was distant at first, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. "No way," I whispered to myself. But the sound didn't stop. My eyes darted to the drawers lining the walls. One of them was slightly ajar. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The baby's cry sounded so real, too real to be just some trick of the mind. My first instinct was to ignore it, but the rules, they kept echoing in my mind. Check the drawers, it said. I took a deep breath and walked toward the row of drawers, trying to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. As I approached, I could feel the weight of the air in the room shift. The sound of crying grew louder, but it wasn't in one place, it was everywhere. I pulled open the first drawer, the metal scraping against the track, and there it was, just as the email had said. One drawer was slightly open. My hand hovered over it, and I quickly closed it, just like I was supposed to. That's when Greg, my coworker, walked into the room. Greg was new like me. He'd been here for only a few weeks, but he seemed to have a sort of laid-back confidence. He didn't take the place too seriously, and definitely didn't buy into any of the rumors about the mortuary. "What's up?" he asked casually, glancing at the drawer I just closed. "It's that baby crying again," I muttered, still unnerved by how real it had sounded. "The rules." "Ah, come on, man. It's just an old building. Don't let it get to you," Greg said with a dismissive wave. "People have been saying this place is haunted for years, but it's just superstition." I wasn't so sure, but I didn't argue with him. He wasn't worried, so I tried not to be. I kept myself busy with the usual duties, but the cry, it lingered in the back of my mind, as if it were following me. The baby's cry faded at times, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I was sitting at my desk when I heard Greg's voice, followed by a sharp curse. I rushed out, worried something had happened, but when I reached the hallway, I froze. Greg was slumped over at one of the desks, his face pale. Blood was pooling from his ears. I rushed over to him, shaking his shoulders, calling his name, but he didn't respond. Then I heard it. That same faint, muffled cry, this time coming from his chest. I froze for a moment, staring at him, too shocked to move. That sound, it wasn't from outside. It wasn't from anywhere I could place. It came from Greg himself, rising up as if something inside him was trying to get out. I didn't know what to do. I ran to call for help, but by the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. Greg was rushed to the hospital, and I never heard from him again. That night, everything felt different. It felt like something was closing in on me, something I couldn't escape. The rules suddenly seemed way more serious than I'd thought. I tried to push it all out of my head, but deep down, I knew this place wasn't just haunted. Something else was happening, something far worse than I could have imagined. The mortuary was quieter now, too quiet. I tried to stay focused, but every time I glanced at the hallway, I kept thinking I saw something move in the shadows. I had to keep going, had to finish the night. But after everything that had happened, I wasn't sure how much longer I'd last. At midnight, I followed the next rule, placing a coin under the tongue of the oldest body in the room. It felt strange, almost like I was carrying out some ritual, but I knew it was a part of what I had to do if I wanted to make it through the night. The body was lying motionless on the slab, its skin pale, almost waxy. As I carefully lifted its jaw, I slid the coin under its tongue. It felt bizarre to be this close to something so lifeless, but I tried to focus on the task. I stepped back, hands in my pockets, and waited. Nothing happened immediately, but there was a noticeable shift in the air, like the room had become stiller somehow. The clock on the wall ticked over to midnight. I stood there for a moment, watching the body, but it didn't move. I thought I was just being paranoid. Then, the coin slid out of the body's mouth. At first, I couldn't tell what had happened. It moved so smoothly, like it had been knocked from the body by some invisible force. I bent down to pick it up, but before I could react, the body jerked upright. Its head turned in my direction, and I froze, instinctively stepping back. The body wasn't alive, of course, but it didn't feel like it should be sitting up either. I stood there, almost waiting for it to do something else, but after a few seconds of tense silence, the body slumped back down onto the slab with a dull thud. I couldn't really explain what I felt in that moment. It wasn't fear so much as confusion. I had just followed the rules, but I wasn't sure what I had expected to happen. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important, though. I didn't know if it was the way the body moved or just the fact that something had shifted in the room, but the whole thing left me unsettled. I tried to clear my head and get back to the task at hand. I had to keep working, even if I wasn't sure what had just happened. So I moved to set up the hidden cameras around the room. I figured that if anything else happened, I needed to capture it. While I was adjusting one of the cameras, I noticed something odd. One of the bodies in the corner of the room, a man who looked to be in his 60s, had a red toe tag. I remembered the rule: don't touch any body tagged with a red toe tag. They're not truly dead. I didn't think much of it at first. I was still trying to digest what had just happened with the other body. But as I was working, I glanced back at the body with the red toe tag. I double-checked it. It was in the exact same position as before. But when I turned back to check it again, just moments later, it was gone. I felt my heart skip a beat. The room was empty. The body that had been tagged with the red toe tag wasn't lying on the slab anymore. I stood still for a second, trying to process it. Had I moved it? I couldn't remember doing so. I walked over to the doorway, my mind racing. I checked the hallway. Nothing. I turned back into the room, scanning every corner. Then I saw it. The body was standing in the hallway, a few feet away from the door. Its head was tilted back, staring up at the ceiling. There was something unsettling about the way it was positioned, like it had been placed there intentionally. But no one had moved it. I hadn't heard anyone else in the building. It didn't make sense. I stared at it for a long moment, trying to figure out what to do next. The body wasn't moving, but it was standing there, with its head tilted back, almost as if it was frozen in place. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Maybe it was the way the body was positioned, or just the way the whole situation didn't feel right. But I knew I needed to stay focused. I walked closer to it, keeping my distance. Every step felt deliberate, like I was trying to approach without disturbing anything. But even though the body was standing perfectly still, I couldn't ignore the fact that it shouldn't be there in the first place. I didn't touch it. I didn't want to risk breaking the rules. I just watched it for a while, taking in every detail. The body's face was neutral, the mouth slightly open, and the eyes empty, lifeless, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me. I knew I had to keep going. I couldn't let myself get distracted by every strange thing that happened. But as I moved back to the camera setup, I couldn't stop glancing at the body in the hallway. It stayed there, motionless, as if it had always been a part of the building. The night dragged on, and I was starting to feel the weight of the rules pressing in on me. I'd already dealt with the unsettling events earlier with the bodies, but it felt like the worst was still ahead. As I was setting up more cameras, the room suddenly plunged into darkness. The familiar hum of the fluorescent lights went silent, and then the power flickered back on, but only for a moment before cutting out again. I knew this was another rule. If the power flickers, light a white candle and place it by the nearest body. I lit the candle quickly, trying to steady my nerves. The flame was small but steady, and I placed it carefully on the counter next to the nearest body. There was something about the candlelight that felt almost wrong. It cast strange shadows around the room, making the walls feel closer and the space smaller. I turned away from the candle, focusing on the task at hand, but then I heard a faint scraping noise. I looked back toward the body. The arm of the corpse, which had been lying perfectly still just moments ago, was now extended toward the candle, as if it were trying to reach for it. I froze, staring at the arm. There was no logical explanation for it. The body had been perfectly still, lying flat on the slab, and now it was reaching for the flame. I almost couldn't bring myself to move. My breath seemed to catch in my throat as I watched the limb stretch out further, inch by inch, until it was just a few inches away from the candle. The fingers twitched, almost as if they were trying to snuff out the tiny flame. I couldn't explain it. This wasn't supposed to happen. I took a cautious step forward, still watching the arm. My instincts were screaming at me to move the candle, to get it away from the body, but I didn't want to break the rule. I had no idea what would happen if I didn't follow it exactly. I stepped back again, still keeping my distance, watching as the arm's fingers curled slightly, just missing the candle's flame. It was as if it was just barely resisting the urge to reach out and extinguish it. I held my breath, waiting for something else to happen, but after a long, tense moment, the arm slowly fell back to the slab with a dull thud, the fingers curling in on themselves. I stood there for a while, unsure of what to do next. The room felt colder now, and I was beginning to wonder if I was losing track of time. I glanced around the room, my eyes darting from one body to the next, but nothing else seemed to move. I tried to focus. I needed to keep going. I had a job to do, and I wasn't going to let fear get in the way. But that arm, it had reached for the candle, like it was trying to stop the flame from burning. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was just one step away from crossing a line I didn't understand. I needed a break. My mind was racing, and the events of the night were starting to blur together. I decided to step away from the morgue for a few minutes and review some of the camera footage I'd set up earlier. Maybe if I watched the footage, I could find some answers, or at least distract myself for a bit. I sat down in the break room, the flickering light from the monitor the only source of illumination. I clicked through the footage from various cameras, replaying the parts I'd been too nervous to watch live. Most of it was uneventful, just the usual stillness of the morgue, the cold and lifeless bodies on their slabs. But then something caught my eye. There was a drawer near the back of the room, and it was slightly open. I had no memory of leaving it like that. I quickly rewound and paused the footage. The drawer was barely ajar, but it was enough to catch my attention. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to make sense of it. Had I missed something? Had I opened it by accident? But then, as I watched more closely, I saw it. The drawer began to slide open on its own. There was no one near it. No breeze, no movement. Just the drawer slowly pulling itself out. I felt a chill run down my spine as I continued watching. The camera angle shifted slightly, but the action was still clear. The drawer opened further, revealing a body lying inside. I couldn't see the face at first, but then the body shifted slightly, and I realized something that made my heart race. The body was holding one of my cameras, and the lens was pointed directly at me. I froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. The body's hand was gripping the camera tightly, its fingers stiff and unnatural. The lens was trained straight at the monitor, at me. It felt impossible. How could this be happening? I hadn't placed a camera there. I hadn't touched that drawer. The image stayed on the screen for several seconds, the body unmoving, holding the camera as if it were waiting for something. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly leaned in closer to the monitor, my eyes still glued to the footage. What the hell was going on? I couldn't tear my eyes away from the recording. Something about the way the body was holding the camera felt deliberate, like it was aware of me watching, like it was trying to send me a message. I kept replaying the footage over and over, hoping that it was just a glitch, some weird trick of the camera. But no matter how many times I watched, the drawer opened the same way. The body held the camera in the same position. It was impossible to ignore. After what felt like an eternity, I finally forced myself to look away from the screen. I had to focus. I couldn't let this stop me. But the image was burned into my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. That body, the camera, it was all pointing to something. I just didn't know what yet. I was starting to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The night had been dragging on, and with each passing hour, the feeling of dread grew heavier. I tried to shake off the unease, but it clung to me, making it hard to focus on anything but the strange occurrences around me. As I walked through the morgue, checking the drawers one by one, my eyes landed on another one that was slightly ajar. It wasn't the same drawer from earlier, but my instincts screamed that I needed to look. I took a step closer, my heart racing as I slowly pulled the drawer open. Inside, I was met with a sight that made my stomach turn. Another body. But this time, it wasn't just lying there like the others. This body was holding something, my phone. I could see the familiar glow of the screen, the same phone I'd left charging on the desk earlier in the night. My hands trembled as I leaned in closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The body's fingers were curled around the phone, and I could see the live feed displayed on the screen. It was a video of me, right at that moment, standing in the morgue, just a few feet away from the drawer. I froze, staring at the phone in disbelief. The live feed was showing me, but the angle was all wrong. The camera was pointing directly at me from a perspective that shouldn't have been possible. The body in the drawer was holding the phone, watching me as if it were aware of my every move. I couldn't breathe. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening. How was this possible? How could this body know what I was doing right then? I watched, transfixed, as the feed on the phone began to glitch. The screen flickered, distorting the image of me in the morgue. It wasn't just a glitch, though. It was as if something was trying to distort the very fabric of reality around me. And then, just as I was about to step back, I saw it. The body's mouth twitched. It wasn't a natural movement. It was deliberate. The corners of its lips curled into what could only be described as a sinister smile. A smile that wasn't just eerie, it was mocking, as if the body knew something I didn't, something I wasn't supposed to see. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind was racing, but I couldn't make sense of it. The phone, the live feed, the smile, it all felt like a twisted game I didn't understand. I had been following the rules for a while now, and they had become second nature. Closing drawers when I heard the baby crying, lighting candles when the power flickered, and placing coins under the oldest body's tongues, everything felt like it was under control. But after some time, that night, something felt different. The air felt heavier, like something was shifting, watching me. It started just like it always did. The faint sound of a baby crying echoed through the morgue, its high-pitched wail cutting through the stillness of the night. I knew what I had to do. I rushed to the nearest drawers, my mind racing as I scanned them one by one. I finally found one slightly open. My hand was already reaching for it when my phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out, checking the screen. It was a notification from the security system. Motion detected in the embalming room. My heart skipped a beat. The embalming room was supposed to be locked, and I hadn't seen anyone go in there. I glanced back at the drawer, my fingers itching to close it, but the urgency of the notification took over. I had to investigate. I rushed down the hallway towards the embalming room. When I reached the door, my breath caught in my throat. It was wide open. The fluorescent lights inside flickered erratically, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. But it wasn't just the lights. The equipment in the room was sparking, electrical wires hanging loose and crackling with dangerous energy. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to shut the door and lock it, but as I tried to push it back into place, I realized it wouldn't stay shut. The door kept swinging open as if something inside was fighting to get out. I panicked. The noise of the baby's crying still echoed in the background, but it was distant now, muffled under the rising tension. My hands shook as I tried once more to lock the door, but it was futile. It refused to stay closed. I could feel the walls of the building closing in around me. The air grew thick, heavy, as if the very structure was alive with something dark and malevolent. I couldn't think straight. I had to act, but I didn't know how. In the chaos, I had forgotten about the drawer. Suddenly, the crying stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. But then, without warning, the silence shattered with an ear-splitting wail, a sound so loud and painful it felt like the very walls of the morgue were shaking. It reverberated through the building, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I staggered back, my heart hammering in my chest. The wail cut through me like a knife, my ears ringing from the intensity. It was unlike anything I'd heard before, raw, primal, and full of agony. I turned back toward the hallway, my mind a blur of fear and confusion. The power flickered, and I caught a glimpse of my phone, still lying on the floor near the drawer. But I didn't have time to think about that. I needed to get out. I had broken the rule, and now I feared the consequences were already unfolding. After the chaos of that night, I thought I'd seen the worst of it. But just when I thought I could get a grip on what was happening, another email came through. This time, the subject line was unsettling. "You were warned, Ryan." It was from the same anonymous sender, a friend. My stomach dropped as I opened the message. There was only one attachment, a photograph. I clicked it, and the image loaded slowly. It was a picture of a man, standing in front of a morgue, wearing a faded uniform I recognized. The name beneath the photo read, Joseph Bell. I froze. For a moment, the name didn't register, but then a cold shiver ran down my spine. I stared at the face in the photo, the same face of the body I had seen earlier, holding my phone, staring at me through the screen. I felt my pulse quicken, my hands trembling as I clicked through the employee records on my computer. I was desperate to find something, anything, that could explain this. Joseph Bell, he had been a worker here, but according to the records, he'd disappeared days ago. No one knew where he'd gone. The authorities had no leads, and it was as if he had vanished into thin air. But the worst part? The chilling realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Joseph Bell never disappeared. He had been here all along, in the morgue. The body that had held my phone, the reflection in the mirror, it was him. The lights in the mortuary flickered, casting erratic shadows across the room. I turned my head, my eyes locking onto the nearest mirror, and then I saw it. It wasn't my reflection. The face staring back at me was not mine. It was Joseph Bell's. My stomach twisted violently as I stared at the image, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. The face in the mirror was cold, expressionless, almost lifeless. I reached up instinctively to touch my own face, but as I did, the reflection in the mirror mirrored my movements, as if I weren't the one in control anymore. I tried to scream, to shout, to do anything to break free from the nightmare, but no sound came out. I opened my mouth, but it was like my voice had been stolen. The silence around me was deafening, and the realization sank in deeper. This was no longer my body. I wasn't just trapped in this place, I was becoming part of it. Joseph Bell's face stared back at me, cold and unblinking, as the room around me seemed to spin out of control. I stood there, frozen, in front of the mirror, unable to look away from the face that wasn't mine. Panic surged through me, but it was as if my body refused to respond. The silence was suffocating, pressing in on me from all sides, and I felt trapped. Not just in this mortuary, but in my own body, no longer my own. Time seemed to stop as I stared at Joseph Bell's face in the reflection. The last shred of my identity was slipping away, and all I could do was watch as I lost myself completely. I tried to move, to scream, but my limbs felt foreign, disconnected. The reflection in the mirror wasn't mine anymore, and I knew deep down I had become part of the morgue's twisted cycle. Eventually, the room faded into darkness, and I don't know how much time passed. I could feel my consciousness dimming, swallowed by whatever dark force had claimed this place. The next night, when the mortuary doors creaked open once again, another worker arrived for their shift, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. They were just like I was when I first walked in, eager, curious, and oblivious to the sinister reality. As they checked their phone, a new email popped up. The subject line was chilling: "Read this or regret it." The name on the email was unmistakable. It was mine, Ryan. The cycle had begun again. And now, it was too late for me, just as it would be for them. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more creepy stories. Stay safe, and see you in the next nightmare.